Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 26 of Podcana. This week, we are not going to be doing our full constructor review. We had a talk, and I think after episode 24 and 25, went through a significant amount of the cards and talked about them in depth. But since the cards have been put on Pixelborn and we've seen deck lists start to emerge, we've seen a meta start to sort of take hold. I think it's time to actually start talking about these deck lists, and we think that will provide more value to all of you rather than going through each card individually, sort of in a vacuum, right, for constructed, because the metagame seems like it's starting to coalesce a bit. You know, we see these aggro decks coming out. We see some of the things that we predicted, right? Maybe the fall of Ruby-Amethyst in control, or at least it's falling off a bit. And we see, Emerald's very powerful. These Amber lists are very powerful. So we just want to dive into all that and give you all some of the deck lists that we've seen perform on Pixelborn and that we've been playing in the past week, so you can take them and go have fun at your locals or go have fun online. Anyway, Moyen, you've been playing the most, as people might notice from my stoic face on this podcast. It's going to be a picture this time. I'm actually at Flesh and Blood Worlds in Barcelona, so I've been testing a lot for that. But I know Moyen has been playing quite a bit. Kawa, have you had a chance to boot up Pixelborn and try out some of the new cards?
Yeah, myself and Moyen were actually playing a lot last night together. So
oh, nice.
It was pretty fun. I've also I've been kind of theory crafting some different builds. It's just like I've had the most fun with basically experimenting with colors that I feel like last set didn't work well together. I probably had the most fun playing like Steel Ruby, which has been super interesting. I'm sure Moyen's going to talk about a few Ruby cards that definitely have potential for sure.
Yeah, Moyen, what has been your experience so far from like a super high level? How has the meta really changed from Chapter 1?
The meta is very hard to describe at this point in time, but everyone's just trying out everything that got upgraded in some way, and also some new decks are emerging. I think the most dangerous thing that has emerged is that the Amber-Amethyst ultra aggressive deck is very dangerous right now. When before it was already having some signs of strength, that still was a little memey. I think right now it's a meta contender for sure.
Yeah, and is that because you're able to utilize that new Arthur Wizard's Apprentice to bounce back some of your cheaper threats in order to get 2 additional lore? That being on top of, now we have like the 2-cost uninkable Pinocchio that quests for 3. Are those some of the threats that are making it sort of tilt over the edge in that power level?
Yeah, the thing is, even so, while before you could combat that deck enough by having early threats that can trade and some rushers to take out their Simba and their Lilo and their Maleficent. Right now, that often isn't enough because they have too many threats that quest for too much. Plus Arthur questing for 3 and protecting one of the high questing threats can actually make it so that even if you can trade every exerted minion every turn, they might still comfortably outrace you. So they got a lot of upgrades in Pinocchio and Arthur, of course. But I think also Madame Mim helps contesting board while protecting something. I think the Merlin can help because just get over the edge in the end. And also the 5-drop pool has increased in quality. Most notably, I would say Eudora is very, very strong. It's a 5-cost 1/9 that quests for 2. And the deck just plays just in time and the bodyguards, and then some 5-cost stress, and a 1/9 just doesn't die through combat. And if they try to kill it, then they might get hit with a Rapunzel if you go to 4 ink.
You say a 5-cost 1/9. I don't think I saw that character.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay,
I don't think we reviewed it yet.
Yeah, can one of you read out that entire card to me? Because that sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, I'll put it up. It's Eudora, so she's a 5-cost Amber card. She is inkable, Storyborn ally, and she just quests for 2. That's it, 1/9. Pretty wow, pretty insane.
That's it's a beefy body to get through. Jeez, and it's questing for 2. That's very disruptive. So I had this sort of macro or high level theory going into Rise of the Floodborn. Just looking at some of the early cards, and even the early Emerald cards, not even the Amethyst stuff. The aggressive package in Rise of the Floodborn seemed to be a bit more powerful, or at least was going to supplement some of the already powerful aggro decks that exist in set 1. And my theory was that any sort of control deck would probably have to play Steel as one of its color. We saw Steel get upgrades in terms of more card draw. We saw it get upgrades where it can challenge not ready characters. So that was like a previous issue the control decks dealt with. But what, in chapter 1, Steel was, I guess it was okay because it's, but it just didn't have as much of a punch as Ruby. Didn't have access to Be Prepared, so it didn't have this sort of agnostic board clear, didn't have Dragonfire to deal with super big threats. But what do you guys think? What is the answer to these aggro decks? Is there like mid-range Steel decks or control-based Steel decks that are able to deal with the amount of pressure that's being put on board?
It's really interesting because just even thinking of like a 1/9, it's a scary stat line. It's a stat line that you wouldn't really like. I feel like in other card games, you're like, oh, it's not really too worrisome, but there's no card in Lorcana that's like Moyen, you can help me out here. There's like the 2 mana card in Hearthstone that just like kills something with 3 or less attack, right? If we had a card like that in Lorcana, it's one of the Shadow Word something.
Shadow Word Pain.
Yeah. If we had a card like that in Lorcana, there's actually it would be insane if that was like 3 attack or less. I feel like that card would be so broken because like we've been preaching forever on this podcast, like the big butts matter, right? Like the important stat line here is that 9 health. That is a lot to try and get through. So yeah, I mean, I did play kind of a pinger deck against Moyen yesterday, which was decent. Like it kind of, chipping away at health is pretty good. It helped against, certain evasive characters and stuff, but just directly dealing with 9 health if you don't have something like Dragonfire is extremely difficult to do it in this game. So personally, I'm actually not sure how we combat this, but I'm sure Moyen has some better thoughts here.
Yeah, so what I want to talk about is that in this game it might actually be, just for playing against removal, it might actually be better to have less attack because there is stuff that removes cards with higher attack.
Yeah, five attack or higher. It's the world's greatest criminal mind, and I've actually been playing that within a kind of support package deck. So this card still is even really good against it, right? Because let's say, for example, Phil, right? Phil, you give this support, you give this +3 attack. It's still not within the 5 attack range, so you'd have to be playing a card like Maximus Bodyguard, and then you could get to it. But that's so much work to try and kill off Eudora by just kind of going that route. So I'd rather just Dragonfire, I think, but it's tough, man.
Yes. So against this ultra aggressive deck, I have a very hard time imagining that anything without Grey has a good matchup into it. But I think Grey has a lot of different ways to try and build against it if it really wants to. So they can play 1-cost Cinderella that can sink for 3 and then basically ping off the Pinocchios, the Lilos before they quest with the Storm Rage on by dealing 2 damage and drawing a card. They can smash stuff, they can fire the cannon stuff. They could even play Robin Hood, which Kawa was trying yesterday, to just deal 1 very early and repeatedly if it doesn't get removed. And later on, they of course still have Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell. So against that deck, I think you want to be playing Grey. But that matchup also needs to be tested. How, if the Grey removal parts help enough that you just destroy that deck, or whether it's still somewhat close.
Yeah, I'm actually interested if we could see Grey in a control package, because Grey was actually a part of what I consider to be the best deck in Chapter 1, which was Wheel Steel. So Amber Steel with a whole new world, had like a very low curve with the lanterns, as well as like Stitch Rockstar had just an insane amount of draw in it as well. I wonder if we could see Steel in in a control package, and if that would be still feasible against these aggro decks. And I also want to ask you, have you seen any of the Wheel Steel deck with upgrades from Rise of the Floodborn? Because I know we talk a lot about Ruby-Amethyst on this podcast because we love that deck. But the best deck of Chapter 1 was probably Wheel Steel. And that deck, that deck is an Amber deck that has like a low curve Steel package with access to AoE removal, and I'm sure that you could kind of tech that deck a bit to deal with the aggro decks. I mean, traditionally, Amber Steel is good against aggro. What about that deck? Have you seen any upgrades to that? Have you seen it on ladder?
The main upgrade I've seen, so I haven't played against it, but the biggest thing I've heard people just talking about it is doing exactly like what Moyen mentioned, was putting in the 1-cost Cinderella and then singing Let the Storm Rage On. That's just like a super good turn 2 anti-aggro play. You get card draw, you ping off some of their aggressive threats. I've heard, I mean, just with Amber Steel in general, people have been talking about, oh, you can play the big Cinderella for kind of late game stuff, but I haven't come across it at the moment, but that's probably because I feel like people are trying to test out, like, you know, different decks and kind of having fun at the moment. But yeah, I want to circle back just super quickly to the deck that I was playing against Moyen yesterday, which was Steel Ruby. And in the matchups where there was multiple threats for my opponent, in this case it was Moyen, I had the Queen of Hearts, like, you know, cards like Queen of Hearts, like, I need to pull up the exact name of it, but it's the 5-cost Queen of Hearts that when one of your characters challenges another character, you draw a card. Pair that with Shere Khan. I think that works really well in terms of you're clearing off your opponent's threats, but at the same time you're gaining card advantage and also gaining lore as well. So that was definitely one way that I always felt. I never felt like, oh, I have to attack and I'm losing, you know, cards, I'm losing lore, like I have to just clear off the threats. Like it worked out pretty well in terms of maintaining the resources that I wanted to keep. And against aggro decks like that, I feel like if you have enough pingers and enough things to deal with, you know, if there's annoying evasive targets, or if your opponent is just like holding, you know, the Pinocchio or other cards just waiting to kind of get there, that works out really well. So that's a deck I definitely want to iterate upon and try to improve, because there's definitely some elements I was kind of missing, but some elements worked really, really well.
I think in general, the Shere Khan Queen of Hearts package can work in a lot of different decks. I think it can even work in a new, different way of playing Ruby-Amethyst if the ultra aggressive deck doesn't become too popular, because it can't beat that. But as long as being able to do minion or character combat is enough to stay alive, then it can just stall into the high card quality, be prepared clears Ursula, Elsa, and also win that way. I've also tried a lot of Amber Steel, and it got a lot of upgrades. The deck is so hard to build right now, because it's probably the deck that has the most viable, strong options to put into its deck.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. You can go real steel. You can instead cut the wheel and play a You Have Forgotten Me version, where you try to 2-for-1 your opponent until they basically run out of value and you still have value. So then you can ramp with Lantern, play real steel. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. But let's talk about the upgrades that it's definitely gotten. So Ariel is as consistent as you want it to be. You no longer have to play Hakuna Matata, and there's still a million inkable songs that you can put into your deck that actually do have value occasionally. That's not just inking them. So let's talk about them. There's World's Greatest Criminal Mind. That's removing a 5 attack or higher. There is Let the Storm Rage On, which isn't inkable, but still a great song to add to the Ariel package in steel. There's Strength of a Raging Fire, which is a removal song that's inkable in gray. And I think there's even more. There's
Painting the Roses Red. Yeah.
Which is just a 2-cost cantrip most of the time. With not too much upside, but an inkable song that's also a cantrip for when you don't need it as ink is also very, very good for Ariel. So these are the songs that upgraded. I've been really liking Dog, which is a 3-cost inkable 2/3 that quests for 2. And it makes it so if it quests, your next character costs 1 less. So it can help you cheat out Surfer Stitches, Rockstar Stitches, Tinkerbells, or Rapunzel, whatever your late game is that you want to be playing, together with Lanterns, so you can get them out very quickly. And one card we liked a lot from the card review, I still like a lot.
Was it Mulan?
Wait, no, actually, I don't know if we reviewed it, but we talked about it in private. It's the Beast, the 5-cost 3/5 quest for 2, and that like draws at least 1 card most of the time. Because it says at the start of your turn, if this character has no damage, draw a card, and then you don't use this to trade. You just draw 1, and then you quest, and you say, even if you don't want to kill this, you have to at least put damage into it to deny me some card draw. And it's a very early, very efficient threat that's very hard to deal with efficiently. So I think in general, Amber Steel got a lot stronger, and it will be a fun puzzle to figure out how to build it for what matters.
Is there any viable beasts that you can actually shift that into, or is I mean the 5-cost beast alone just seems really good anyways, but I don't think there's any very good beasts.
I think that fundamentally, when you look at that card, there's no reason to 2-for-1 yourself with the shift.
Sure.
Because you're using it as a value card to draw cards, and there's no reason to sort of already go down an additional card to get the effect, unless there's some effect at that ink level that sort of prevents you from getting additional value. It's really interesting because Beast is being paired with Rapunzel as well. You're forcing your opponent to trade damage into it or clear it in order to stop the card draw. But if they aren't able to clear it and they do just try to put damage in to stop the card draw, you're able to draw more cards with Rapunzel. Yeah.
But I think shifting it, so there is no good shifting options in Omnigen Way, but being to shift it, even if it's a value option and you sacrifice value to get it out earlier, it would still make a lot of sense because it means you get to start generating that value a lot earlier. If you do it if let's say you were to get Beast out very early, you could even not quest and just get a few extra draws. So there's some merit in that, but yeah, it is just good without the shift option, and there's no good cheap Beast to shift this onto.
Now, I do want to mention to people listening and watching while I remember it that for any deck lists that we talk about, they will all be in the description. So both on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just on YouTube, if you want to follow along. I'll be popping up images, but if you want to look at the actual deck list, I'll have them below. Kawa, you were saying?
Yeah, I was actually just going to touch on something. I know we mentioned it a little bit earlier in private, Brendan. Pick a Fight. That's a card that a lot of people from the previous episode mentioned to us that I think they reckon that we kind of undervalued the card. Do you still think it's kind of the same, or do you value it a bit more? I know the comment section were mentioning that it's a really good card to kind of tackle ward. It means that you can kind of get past that. Do you think it's still not that good? Do you think it's maybe a little bit better than we first anticipated?
I think it's a meta call at best, right? So what people did when they mentioned in the comments is they pointed out more use cases for the card than I had originally thought of. That being said, if you're not removing some very prominent character that you can't usually remove, I don't think I would play it currently. But it's a good tech card to have in case the meta degenerates to a state where there are cards that are hard to interact with, that have ward, that are not questing, that you aren't able to effectively target.
Sure.
I think it's still terrible. It's uninkable. And then people pointed out how sometimes your character can attack multiple times, but I think that's quite rare. Could be very good on 6-cost Beast, where you just kill everything until Beast can no longer kill, has enough HP. But I think this being uninkable kills the card. And even if it was inkable, I'm not sure it would be that good.
Speaking of terrible, there was a card that was very hyped up on Twitter during spoiler season that I know pretty much all of us didn't like. So I just want to ask you guys about Dinner Bell, and if you were experimenting with Amber, Ruby, that would be a deck you might play this in. Have you guys seen a lot of Dinner Bell? So Dinner Bell is a 4-cost and inkable item in Ruby that said tap and pay 2, draw cards equal to the damage on chosen character of yours, then banish them. People were saying that this is the hottest thing to happen to Ruby. Have you guys seen this card make any impact?
The only time I mentioned this card to Moyen was yesterday. I memed about him putting 4 into his new Ruby-Amethyst build. But no, I personally have not seen it. I did play against one Ruby Amber today, but I didn't see the item come out. I'm sure they probably had it in their deck. But yeah, I still don't see the crazy hype for the card personally.
Yeah, I haven't ever seen it. And
maybe okay with Mother Gothel, right? There is a character that tech is it seems like it was designed to go with it, but outside of that, I mean, I don't know, just no way. Even with Mother Gothel, it's a stretch. I'd rather just Rapunzel the Mother Gothel.
I agree. It's way better to Rapunzel your Mother Gothel, I think, than doing Dinner Bell, because you have to pay the additional 2. Rapunzel in general is such a better card to do on 4 than Dinner Bell in every situation. Yeah, I don't know.
All right.
If Tempo didn't exist at all, then maybe Dinner Bell would have a place. But you're spending your entire life savings and house to draw a few cards and hope your opponent's AFK.
All right, Moyen. I see a list from you here in our little group chat, and it's Ruby-Amethyst. Talk to me about what modern day Rise of the Floodborn Ruby-Amethyst is looking like. I see the evasive have come out, and I'll tell you that in lieu of Rise of the Floodborn, slapping evasive onto every single card printed, I think that that's probably correct. Also, you're trying to deal with these aggro decks. Talk to me about the upgrades that this deck got and where it exists in the metagame right now in the context of how powerful some of these aggro decks are.
I think it's a very reasonable contender at keeping Steel Ember in check, but it will fold to complete aggro, and it might have its issue against Emerald, which we haven't talked about, the strong upgrades Emerald got, but Emerald's kind of hard to deal with for control right now, so both Ultra Aggro and Emerald can cause issues in the new set, I would say, to Ruby-Amethyst. But I think Ruby-Amethyst can be maybe a good meta bring if you're expecting a lot of Ember Steel. So but we don't know how to perfectly build it, but we can talk about what significant upgrades it got of cards that you are most likely going to see in new Ruby-Amethyst, if it still exists as a deck. And that is the new Merlins. And I know there's like 4 Merlins, but only 2 of them are really good, I would say. There's the Gold Merlin for Cost Inkable 4/3 that gives you 1 lore when he enters and when he leaves battlefield. And there's the other Merlin, which is Merlin Rabbit. It's uninkable. It's a 2/3. And when he enters and leaves play, he draws you a card. So I think both of these Merlins are insane upgrades for the mid game. They're very hard to deal with. Even if they're being dealt with, they give you some value. So it's basically the only way to deal with these cards efficiently is basically play something that does more than these cards in the long term and ignore them. But yeah, they fill that mid-game hole perfectly in Ruby-Amethyst. And then also a huge upgrade is Madam Mim, the Washer, which means you can actually play a few more 1 and 2 costs in the deck, because it doesn't hurt you so much to play them, because you don't lose out on ink necessarily. You can just use them to maybe trade or ink, and then get them back to your hand, developing a 4/3 Wash. And if this ever happens to be bad because you didn't draw a card that you want to be bouncing, then you can just ink the Madam Mim as well. So these are like the definite upgrades to the deck, I would say. Maybe Felicia as well.
Yeah, Felicia's so good. I don't know. I just remember when Felicia was spoiled. We've been playing Flesh and Blood for like 14 hours a day for the past 5 days. But I remember I pulled it up on my phone and I just showed it to the table, and it was just like, oh man, thank God.
So Felicia is a 1-cost Inkable 3/1, and that helps your early game out a lot. It's reckless, but that's totally fine for what the deck's trying to do. So I guess Felicia, both the Merlins and Madam Mim are very, very significant upgrades to the deck. I think now I want to be playing Pascal in the deck more than before. Pascal is just a really good 1-drop. And it helps that you can get some quest and then just Madam Mim it. And what I've been trying is actually working Shere Khan and Queen of Hearts into the deck to get more value out of character combat, or force your opponent to quest a little bit less, and then fill that bridge into the late game. Because if they do quest, then you can, while getting your trades off, you get lore with Shere Khan, and also some card draw with Queen of Hearts. And to facilitate doing more minion combat or character combat if you don't have characters on the board, I was also trying the 2-cost Queen of Hearts, where you can shift the 5-cost Queen of Hearts onto, and it has Wash. Then you have Maui as Wash, and that's basically the extra character combat you're playing.
Yeah. Do you think that the evasive package, the pongos that made their way into all these lists, and I mean, we can even talk about, like, what's funny is at the end of set 1, there was probably still people playing the control deck and playing more than 60 cards to try to last in the mirror. Do you think that those versions of the deck are sort of going to be gone now, at least in this early metagame that is dominated by aggro? I mean, surely the decks that were playing more 60 cards, there's no way those can exist in a more aggressive metagame.
But they never existed.
They never existed. I knew you were going to say that.
People were huffing on copium, but they never existed in my mind.
What do you think about the evasives? Are they gone for good?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the evasives were never like a core part of the deck. They were more of a meta call of this is actually how we get a good game plan into the mirror, and actually have better value into other decks than just playing the infinite card loop in the endgame. The infinite card loop's also gone. That's not going. I mean, I don't think it was good before. I think it's even worse now. Also, one thing about the evasives is basically in the non-mirror matchup, or even in the mirror matchup, they're just straight up worse than the Merlins. Because they basically made it so you have something to play. So you are also threatening, and if your opponent doesn't threaten enough, you don't have to play your removal. And I think the Merlins fill that role in the same way, while being just extremely efficient cards.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember the first card that I slotted into the Ruby-Amethyst control deck was the Uninkable Merlin, just the one that draws effectively like 2 cards. It's just insane. But you know, the big takeaway for Ruby-Amethyst right now, I think, is that it is, at least in the, I don't even know what you would call this metagame, week 1, pre-week 1, whatever. It seems to be poorly positioned at best, right?
Yeah, because while the deck got a lot stronger in what it wants to do, I think Emerald and ultra aggressive deck can, how do we call that deck? Can cause issues.
Yeah, so just, you talking about the Emerald,
the Ember-Amethyst.
Yeah.
But actually, I almost don't want to talk about that deck because I don't want to be responsible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's that's honestly my biggest concern for Lorcana as a whole was that if aggro decks got like 5 to 10% better, which I think they might have got more than that, the game might be kind of bad if, you know, people just literally plop down their characters and go 90 degrees, because it's very, very uninteractive.
I think. Go ahead, Moy.
Yeah. I just don't want to come off as if we figured out any meta. It's just basically this is concerns of how the meta might develop. Like, we don't know how good it actually will be, but we tested enough to know that it can do very powerful things, and it can be a very dangerous deck for the meta game.
Yeah, I think if that deck is gonna be, again, yeah, like it's so early to call at the moment, but I think what you were mentioning earlier, Brendan, is what the players who prefer to play control decks are gonna have to do, is probably opt for Steel with another color combo. Just like Steel just has the best answers in terms of pinging off aggressive threats within the early game. If that's Amber Steel with the Cinderella combo, if that's even maybe Amethyst Steel hasn't been too bad. Maybe Emerald Steel with the kind of discard package as well. I just think pairing Steel with cards like Robin Hood and other pingable stuff is probably going to be your best bet to answer ultra aggro, as we've kind of seen from set 1, right? Like the mid-range Amber Steel deck was pretty good as well. So
yeah, Steel just is kind of Lorcana's color answer to aggro, right? It just has like it has their removal. I mean, it has AoE removal. So
so basically what I'm saying is I don't think that this deck will have no counters, but if Grey is the only counters, that can still make the deck very, very dangerous, if it means that this deck is so good that your only way of beating is having Grey in your deck.
Yeah, the gray stonks are definitely rising. All right, let's talk about
prices. Just doubled.
Yeah, they're going through the roof. Let's talk about this Emerald-Amethyst deck. I mean, you mentioned Emerald got a lot of upgrades. Just walk us through that, Moyen.
So Emerald-Amethyst is one way to try to do it. I'm not actually sure about what the best Emerald pairing is at the moment. I think Grey has some potential. I think Purple has potential, but honestly, every color you would have to try how it actually functions now with Amethyst. Amethyst got a lot of upgrades. Let's go through the most notable ones. It has Enchantress, which quests for 2, and it's a 2-cost thinkable 1/1. That's a 3/1 on your opponent. So it's because you want to be questing with this at all times. It's basically a 3/1. So it's very hard to trade down into it, to trade up into it. It's very hard for this to get traded in a way that's unfavorably for you. And if it doesn't get traded, it quests for 2 as a 2-drop, which is very good. So it's almost comparable. I think it's comparable to how good Flynn Rider is. Then it got a lot of strong discard cards and some support for it. And what I like about the discard cards is that they don't need support. They can be good on their own, but they have some support. So let's go to the discard. We have let's say the support card for it first. It's the 3-cost Prince John we talked about last time. 3-cost uninkable 1/2 quest for 2 ward, and it says when your opponent discards 1, you draw 1. So having this on the board, which is not easy to remove, it's basically the easiest way to remove this would be grab your sword because it has ward and it's very resistive, has a lot of resistance against everything that's not grab your sword. So if you have this on the board, all the discards get better, and we have a few good new discards. We have Hypnotize, 3-cost action, your opponent discards 1, you draw 1. We have Daisy Duck, 4-cost 2/3 quest for 2, your opponent discards 1 when this quests. And I also really like Lucifer, which is the 5-cost uninkable quest for 2. When you play this, your opponent either discards 1 or discards 1 action or discards 2 cards. So all of these cards, they can be outraced, right? It's not hard to imagine your opponent just questing faster than these cards quest. That's very possible. But I think these cards make it very hard for your opponent to try to play the long game while you're putting out a lot of threats that are hard to deal with, but in different ways, while they make you discard your cards and while they might generate card advantage, not just by making you discard, but also by drawing extra cards, potentially with Prince John.
Yeah, I honestly think Lucifer is such a ridiculous card because of the fundamentals of the card, right? It's a 5-cost and it's an inherent 2-for-1. So at the floor, your opponent discards 1 action, right? But then they also have to use another card to deal with this. So that could be a card on board. That could be a card out of hand. So it pretty much is a 2-for-1. But then the ceiling, or not even the ceiling, the I guess like the not low floor, but these kind of median is a 3-for-1, and you're getting that at 5 resources. That's ridiculous, because I think where we see a somewhat comparable effect is like 9-cost Maleficent, where it comes down and it kills something. Obviously a different ability, but in terms of like card economy, it's somewhat similar. And I think Lucifer's like slightly a bit better because it 3-for-1s your opponent more often than Maleficent does. It just seems insane to me.
I would say the floor is not just the 2-for-1, right? The floor would be this goes 1-for-1, and then your opponent doesn't have to use an entire card to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think it's not fair to say it always 2-for-1s, because maybe they wanted to play Grab Your Sword anyways and it just dies, or maybe you get 2 quests and then they have a very efficient trade for them, and then that's not straight 2-for-1. It's more like 1.5-for-1 or 1.4-for-1. But that's a good floor to have.
Yeah, that's good for a floor. Yeah, it's so strong. And then, I mean, just the fact that like Emerald can, because I think that a lot of people looked at Emerald and they were like, oh, we had Prince John, we had this whole package to support it. But just the fact that like Hypnotize and Daisy Duck are good, like decent cards on their own. And then when Prince John is on the battlefield, they just get so much better. Just makes me so scared to play against Emerald, to be honest. Like Emerald was definitely the color I was the most afraid of initially, looking at Rise of the Floodborn. It was like aggro in general, but mostly Emerald, to be honest.
Yeah, so I would say both. So Ember-Amethyst full aggro is very good against control, except against steel. I would say anything that pairs with Amethyst is good against control, against like slower control type decks, because it can just out card economy them. But it can get outraced by aggro. And then Amber Steel in this meta prediction that I'm doing right now would be a little bit more flexible, versatile in how you build it, and it can do a lot of different things, but it keeps aggro in check and should have at least close matchup against lots of different decks, because it's just that flexible.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, there's a few lists in our group chat, but there is one ink color that is missing from all of these deck lists, and that is Sapphire. Did y'all have any experience experimenting with Sapphire at all?
I actually just popped one into the chat there, and I messed around with Sapphire Amber. I kind of took the shell that I know you faced against this color combination a little bit in your locals, I believe, Brendan. I know you said you faced like kind of a Maximus inclusion in there, so I kind of took that shell and added a few different cards. This deck so far, I've seen some pretty good potential from it, but then overall, when you're facing the aggro matchup, it is pretty difficult. I experimented with quite a few cards. I even asked Moyen for some advice of how we could kind of adjust this deck. I think you can definitely slot Ariel into this deck. You're running 12 inkable songs, the Be Your Guest, the world's greatest criminal mind, and also Let It Go. Your typical Hades stuff in there. The biggest inclusion here is, I think, Cisu. Cisu is an incredible card. I think Cisu is like really, really good. Winnie the Pooh has been pretty decent as well. I'm a big fan of this 3-cost 2/3 stat line that can quest for 2 and that just have decent abilities, right? Like previously we've been playing the Ariel, which is just great because it finds you a card, can still quest for 1, but a lot of these cards coming out, I believe Benja as well is the steel version of these 3-cost 2/3 cards that can destroy an item. Which again, if we ever get into an item heavy meta, is pretty decent. But this deck has been fun to play for sure. The Queen has been pretty impressive as well. I think that the Queen is a nice tool to you can get some major board swings with it, but again, it is quite conditional in terms of how the board is set up. But even doing Queen turn 1 into Queen on turn 2 is pretty nice, and you can do it. Again, obviously depends on percentages and stuff, but like I would say relatively consistently, right? Like it's the same thing as if you can do Lilo and Simba pretty much at the start of your games. It's just if you mulligan well, like you might hit it pretty often. The deck's been fun. But I don't think I honestly so far I don't think this deck is anywhere near as impactful as it was in the previous set and the previous meta, mainly because this did pretty well against It did decently against Ruby-Amethyst, right? And it seems like we're not really in that type of meta at the moment. It seems like it's like a super aggressive meta currently. Again, I don't want to say meta like Moist. I want to say pre-meta, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
I personally didn't get to try new Sapphire yet, but it wasn't on the top of my list because it didn't get that many new upgrades that excited me or to try new stuff. I think the heal stuff, now that we've seen our cards, the heal synergies seem a little off. They don't seem like they're quite there.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cisu is a huge upgrade for sure. Winnie the Pooh, the 3-cost that can ramp is pretty decent. I think Caterpillar is pretty good. It's a 3-cost 1/3 quest for 3.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've reviewed it. But
no, I don't think
that's
so.
That's just a lot of quest while having enough HP to not just fold to any AoE. So it will get at least the 3 quest off quite a lot, I would say. So I think Cisu, Caterpillar, Winnie the Pooh are the standouts. And if blue in set 1 was mostly... I think in set 1, blue was mostly, as Kawa pointed out, like an anti-control tech. It's like you only really wanted to play blue if you wanted to have a strong late game and have overwhelm your opponents by having more resources and then just out questing them with like Hades, Let It Go. And Cisu helps with that, Caterpillar helps with that. But I don't know if this niche still exists. I think if you want to beat control, maybe there's better things, better decks that do that now, that also are better against other decks. So
yeah,
I don't have too much hopes for blue, but it's very, very early to judge this.
I have a somewhat hot take as well, which is I think in the last meta, people played this deck as a way to get an edge on Ruby-Amethyst. But I actually think it didn't have an edge. I think the matchup was at best like maybe 50-50 for them. Like they just had some tools that were minorly annoying for Ruby-Amethyst, like a Hades loop, like Eye of the Fates, like, you know, sort of agnostic board removal in the form of Hades, Let It Go. But the problem with Sapphire's removal against Ruby-Amethyst is that
it helps them, right? It gets them to the 7 faster, actually, which is quite funny.
It's not really the it's not really the 7. So like, yeah, it does get you there faster, but what it really does is that it gives you so many things in Inkwell so that you can activate your magic mirrors every single turn and now card draw them anyway.
Sure.
Because usually you have to kind of build up to that.
Yeah, so you also maybe have to spend less resources on anything. So yeah, even last meta, that's what people used it for, but it was a close matchup anyways. It wasn't anything that It
Yeah.
just beats Ruby-Amethyst.
I
But
will-
okay. You
I
might
will
not know.
say Emerald Sapphire for me was definitely the hardest matchup I ever faced as Ruby Amethyst.
Yeah, but
It's
that's
just-
I mean, I don't know if I would almost get up. Okay. By now, I have a very competitive background, but I would almost get upset at if I queued into that deck with Ruby-Amethyst last meta, I would almost get upset at them for playing it because it's like unplayable in the meta, but they hit like just that matchup where it's actually good.
Yeah, it was definitely a tech pick. If you were targeting Ruby-Amethyst and you're basically taking an auto loss to like any steel-based Amber deck, or just like any steel-based deck in general. So
Or Ember-based deck, or Emerald-based deck.
or any deck. So there's a card in here that I was definitely a bit more up on than you guys, which is Cisu. So you guys now playing with that card, actually being able to experience it, the power level was there. Was it as? Was
Oh
it,
yeah, I think it's really good. I think it's really, really good. If you get it off once, it's good. If you get it off twice, it's really good. If it sticks on board after that, man, the value of the card is just insane, right? Like even hitting it once, you feel good. Once you hit it again, it's like it is a card that your opponent wants to remove as fast as possible. So yeah. It's really nice.
Or just what Kawa was experimenting in when they tried the Ember Sapphire deck is basically just also having a few decent support cards, because World's Greatest Criminal Mind can't actually remove too much because most stuff's below 5 attack, but just a little bit below. And I think it's a very nice idea to actually get big tempo swings out of this card, because it can be sung as well by just supporting your opponent's character together. So I think that's kind of nice.
Yeah, just like we were kind of deciding on what extra support card. We knew we were always going to throw Maximus in there because that's just a solid card in general. We were debating between the new 3-cost Mulan or just Phil, and I kind of thought that Mulan was fine because usually, like, I don't know, like this stat is not correct. Like, this is not a fact, but like when I think of kind of cards, I say most of them would probably have about 3 attack. If you add the 2, you'll get to the 5. But there are some cards that have 2 attack that sometimes you might want to have Phil there to get up to the 5 attack instead. But that's cards like, I don't know, like in terms of cards that are threats. Well, I guess look, Cisu is one of them. Ursula, like if I killed an Ursula by doing Phil and then World's Greatest Criminal Mind, I'd feel pretty good. Like that would be kind of a cool play, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's not that you really need the 3 attack, but I would still just play Phil in that deck.
Sure.
I would just play Phil Mulan because they are pretty good cards on their own, and they make it so that suddenly World's Greatest Criminal Knight is really good.
Well, I mean, that goes through like our first preliminary list. What are y'all's thoughts on the set impact in terms of gameplay so far? I know we're all in the honeymoon phase. You know, we're experimenting with all these new cards, and that's exciting, building new decks. But how has the gameplay been so far? Because we saw like the dynamic of Lorcana is completely different. Prior to Razlet Floodborn, you could basically see the amount of quests your opponent had, and it was very predictable, and you had full agency to sort of play around their quest value on your turn if they had things tapped, or you just like kind of knew what their board state was. Now they can bounce things back to gain lore. They can make
attack with they can attack with Shere Khan, get more lore.
Tons of things, right? I mean, Shere Khan represents something on board, but like there are things that they can play out of hand to get lore that you couldn't see. So like the dynamic of the game has generally changed, and like we talked about, like maybe the aggro decks are more than 5 to 10% better. What have been y'all's experiences in terms of gameplay so far?
Yeah, it's been annoying when I was playing Moyen and he's just playing Merlin the Goat the whole time, bouncing it back, bringing it back. Like, you have to really keep in mind, like really, really keep in mind cards in hand, saying, okay, they can play that, they can bounce this back. Like, if it's a situation where Moyen can quest on board to get to 18, and then with the cards in hand, like, say Moyen has 7 ink, can just do Merlin and then bounce it back, and then that's game. Like, those are things you really need to kind of consider now, and I think that the bounce deck in particular with those combos, yeah, it's stuff that people aren't going to be used to immediately, and it's been frustrating, but at the same time, it's been enjoyable. You know what I mean? Like you said, it's a different dynamic, and for me, that's always exciting. It's a new challenge to take on. You know?
Yeah, there's also the game where I just had like very little board, and then suddenly a few Shere Khan and 2-cost Queen of Hearts came out to get a lot of floor. There's So this stuff exists now that you have to think about, but it's not like completely out of the blue. You still know about what your opponent could have. You know, if your opponent has Amethyst, you know they could have a Emerald. If you know if your opponent is in the color Ruby, they could have a Sheer Khan. So it's just a few things that you have to keep in mind, which I think is a nice progression as the second set for the game. I also really like that deck building got a little more interesting now, because now you have more options on the same power level. Especially in Ember Steel, for example, you have so many options now, while maybe before deck building was a little more simplistic because you didn't have that many options on that power level that you want. Anyways, so about the meta, I would say, I have already tested that Ember-Amethyst aggro just really destroys non-steel decks. What I haven't tested yet is how badly does steel beat up on the aggro deck. And I hope it absolutely destroys it, just so that people won't play so much Ember-Amethyst aggro, just because they're too afraid of this one matchup that keeps it in check. Right? I hope that steel is good enough into it that the meta doesn't suddenly become that suddenly develop into a way where Ember-Amethyst is like a tier 0 deck, because I think that would be really bad for the game. As long as that doesn't happen, I'm very hopeful and looking forward to figuring out the new meta.
Yeah. I mean, looking from the outside in, like I said, I've basically just been playing Flesh and Blood. It looks really cool, and it's great to see some of these lists emerge that we were speculating on beforehand. And I'm keen to experiment. Honestly, the thing I'm looking for the most is a steel-based control or mid-range deck. Likely playing with a color that is not amber. And trying to see if I can do something there, because maybe something like Steel Amethyst. If most of the threats you're being presented with don't require something like a Dragonfire or Be Prepared, maybe you can drop the sort of agnostic removal there and just go with damage-based removal and play on board. Or maybe you pair Steel with something like Ruby, and because Steel has more access to more card draw, you don't need the support of Amethyst, because Amethyst definitely lacks in the removal department, right? So if you can find card draw somewhere else, maybe we can find a different support color for control, which is really that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, basically now the base control color might just not even be Amethyst or Ruby, it might just be gray, and then what do you pair gray with to actually make it a control deck? Because gray inherently is more mid-range, but it can lay the groundwork for a new control deck, and I think that's very exciting. Although I think viewers are already memeing about us just being control fetishists.
Yeah. I mean, somebody said that, and I definitely replied. I was like, "That is fair," because they're like Brendan evaluates every Ruby-Amethyst card as if it was going to go into the Ruby-Amethyst control deck. He knows that there's other colors, that there's other archetypes in these colors. I was like, not my world. Nope, just Ruby. I mean, Ruby-Amethyst was one of my favorite decks of all times across any card game, to be honest. So I do think the deck, we start to sunset it a little bit, at least how it worked in set 1. Maybe we'll find something else to sort of take up the good cause of control. But right now it's looking like it's going to be a process for sure.
I'm so excited to figure out the either Grey Ruby. Actually both. I want to figure out how would Grey Ruby look like and how would Steel Amethyst, Steel Ruby look like. I think both of them have at least potential in theory. I'm excited for those.
Yeah, I messed around a little bit with both of them already. Again, like very minimally. And I enjoyed both. I thought that the Ruby package was good, like Moyen mentioned, with the Shere Khan, with the Queen of Hearts. That's your card draw engine now within Ruby is pretty much that Queen of Hearts. I think it actually works pretty well. And then on the Amethyst side, obviously you keep the card draw, and even messing around with cards like it was the Fairy Godmother, the 3 cost that when you play Cinderella exerts an opposing character, so you can pair that with the small 2 cost Cinderella, which basically has Simba's ability, and then also the bigger Cinderella. So there's some cool things that you can do within Steel Amethyst. I am leaning more so towards Steel Ruby personally, because I think it's a little bit more consistent, but again, I have to do more testing with it personally.
So am I.
Yeah,
I'm actually leaning towards that as well. not because of consistency, but because Ruby, I would rely on Steel for pretty much for all of the card draw, most if not all, and then I would just Ruby would be the additional pair color for just more board control and just more control in general, things like Dragonfire, Be Prepared, but also just the efficient threats, things like Gaston. So I guess it's interesting because like then you're like, maybe is it overkill in terms of like how much I'm trying to beat up on combat and clear the board?
Sure,
I think it will definitely happen where you have like more characters that want to attack something than your opponent has characters that actually can be attacked.
Yeah.
So that could be one issue of it. But I think Shere Khan and Queen of Hearts are so crazy to me. It's not like they don't completely break the game, but they're just so consistent. And because they're both inkable, and some conditions in this game, we talk about how they're like a Christmas land or something.
Yeah.
How they're very hard to meet. But Shere Khan and Queen of Hearts are both inkable, and they're so consistent because they both just say when any character or any of your character challenge any of your opponent's characters.
And that's going to happen. That's going to happen in a game. Exactly.
I think that happens in Lorcana, that any of your characters challenges any character. It's not, none of them say, oh, this character has to challenge something, or it's just a very easy condition to meet if you ever get into any character combat.
Yeah. I mean, right now it seems like you either need to be competing via combat against your opposing aggro deck, or you need to be in Steel so that you can remove it via AoE removal. Because the AoE removal in Ruby is just too slow. Like, I mean, Be Prepared just seems pretty weak in this meta, at least like initially, unless you're pairing it. Yeah. Because like, I mean, you have Fire the Cannons, freaking grab your swords. Like, all that stuff can also be cheated out early.
Yeah, you've got the small Queen of Hearts now as well, the Rush, which has been pretty good. You've got Felicia, which we mentioned earlier, which is just like super good against.
I love Felicia.
Yeah.
It's like the best one drop.
I want about the Queen of Hearts, I think you kind of have to remove it because, like, even without it being exerted, because it just means as soon as your opponent has a Queen of Hearts on board, that means every character that you quest with might just be an extra card draw for your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happened yesterday, Moyen, where I think at one stage I had it, and you were like, I don't want to quest with any of my cards because then you get cards, and then it was the same with me where I had to hold as well. It's crazy.
Yeah, I was playing some Emerald deck, and he was playing the Steel Ruby, and he had the Queen of Hearts on the board, and I normally I would be winning this game. So I discarded his hand. So it was like on 0 cards, just drawing 1 card each turn. And in a normal game state, I would be winning this because I just quest with my characters. And even if he gets some trades, that's just enough to get me over the line over a few turns. But at that point, I wasn't close enough to 20 that I could just get to 20 over 2 or 3 turns. And it just meant as soon as I quest, I lose the game because I give him an extra card.
And I had Shere Khan as well, and I was getting Lorcana. Like the combination that we talk about of those 2 cards specifically, if they're both out on board, each attack, you're still gaining stuff from it, which is just insane.
And it actually was so bad that in a normal game set, Kawa wouldn't even have been able to quest because he would have been busy trading to myself.
Yeah, exactly.
But he could even quest, and I had favorable traits that I could have taken into his quested characters, and I couldn't take them because if I take them, he gets cards of Queen of Hearts.
Yeah.
So while everything about this is crazy, just to
dial it back down a bit. Yeah.
Dial it back down a little bit. I also played a bit with Spessy yesterday, and he's very big on the aggro Ember.
He's having a good time right now.
And I tried to beat it without playing Steel. I talked about how miserable that is, but I kid you not, there was like 2 or 3 games in a row where every time his character was exerted, I could kill it, and I still didn't get close to winning the game because it was just not enough to kill the exerted characters because they just still get to 20 before you.
Yeah.
And their characters don't exert as much because they can just Arthur them back. And maybe there's also a 1/9 coming down, even if it's exerted. That takes like I don't know, it takes your entire turn to kill it if you're even able to do it in your entire turn.
Yeah, I do not want to face a just in time into Eudora like that. That is so difficult to beat.
I think that deck's so good.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so he just like his deck now that he's gotten the upgrades just literally has too much quest in the bottom right hand corner that it doesn't even matter if you kill it after it exerts because it's just like this Yeah, that's
Yeah.
tough. So maybe
Also-
you just like need this anti like
Yeah.
things like Shere Khan or things like Aladdin to like punish them
Sure.
for questing
Yeah.
Queen of Hearts.
Yeah, but the Shere Khan's not enough. Anything that just helps you for your game plan is not
It's
enough.
not enough
It
for
would
the-
be
yeah,
something
You
that
just need to stop their game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
stop-
you need
stop
to
their
remove
game.
them from questing way faster than before it even gets to combat, and that's where steel comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you just gain some lore while killing some of their stuff, they will still gain more lore faster than you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is tough. Also, that deck's very comfortable at just staying at 3 ink. Doesn't need more than that.
Oh
enough
my
of the time.
God.
Three ink. Oh my.
That's
No,
the most
I'm not kidding.
degenerate thing I've ever heard.
It's a 3 ink deck. Sometimes you
no.
go to 4 to play Rapunzel, but if basically you play you just in time your 5 drops, or you just use them to get to 3 ink, and that's good enough. And then you keep playing Lilos, Arthurs, and Pinocchios, and
Okay, so what we want people to take away from this podcast is for them to not play Amber Amethyst and just play Steel. Just try something else. Oh,
Yeah, and if you have a good anti-Amber Amethyst list, please link it.
please,
in the
yes,
YouTube
please let
comments.
us know.
Save us. Yeah,
help
please.
us out.
Yes. We need. I'm not going to be satisfied until Spessie's a control player, and that's going to take a lot. All right. Well, exciting times. It's always great to have a new set and experiment with the new cards, build new decks. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot of evolution over the next couple weeks, and we're definitely going to keep our ear to the ground on that. Keep playing, keep grinding, and just enjoy. Hopefully, this Lorcana meta is as dynamic as Chapter 1 was. I mean, Chapter 1. You could actually talk about evolutions and changes in the meta every single week, which is incredible, especially for, Lorcana is technically a paper TCG, but it is a very digital game. And in a digital game, having a meta that it is that in flux, very, very impressive. So hopefully we get that again. And yeah, for us, if you listen to the podcast, you enjoy it, the number one thing you can do is leave us a review. You can do that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can check us out on YouTube for a video version of this, youtube.com/Podcana. Hit us with a subscribe while you're there. Almost at 1,000 subscribers. So big milestone for us. We're all on Twitter. I don't have the OBS overlay in front of me, but I can guess. I'm at BrentAPG. We're at Kawatech_CG and at Moyen HS. No underscore, right? Just
No,
Moyen
there's no
HS.
underscore.
Oh.
Damn, so close. So close. And yeah, thank you all so much for listening. If you have anything about the meta or anything you want us to read out in terms of questions and stuff, we're bringing back our sort of listener question section. So shoot us that on YouTube and we'll get them discussed next week. But thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you next week.